The ruins held their breath. One moment there were birds somewhere in the dry scrub beyond the valley road, wind moving through broken stone and exposed rebar at the edges of the old walls, the kind of background sound that belongs to a place still deciding what it is going to become. Then nothing. That specific silence that arrives in the second before the world commits to what it has been planning. Staff Sergeant Hazel Kaur was already moving when the first shot cracked off the stone wall beneath her. She pressed flat against the high ledge of the old Soviet motor pool ruins. The M110 braced hard into her shoulder, her right eye tight to the scope, reading the valley road 40 feet below. White smoke drifted up from the eastern perimeter. Red smoke from signal grenades was blooming near the second ranger position, which meant someone down there was bleeding and calling for help they were not certain would arrive. Her radio crackled. "Shade," Corporal Clem Darv's voice, 24 years old and holding the line by will alone. "2 mics to next engagement, talk to me." Hazel did not move. She was running the math she had been running for the last 6 minutes. Wind from the northwest, 9 knots, dropping with the valley's thermal shift. Range to the northern breach point, 330 meters. Elevation, -42 degrees from her position. She had already fired 4 rounds. She knew exactly where the next one had to go. "Still up," she said into the radio. A pause, 1 breath. Left ear's gone. Clem's voice was tight but controlled. "Still up." That was enough. Clem was still calling, still breathing. That meant there was still time. Hazel pressed her cheek into the stock and found that quiet place that lives between heartbeat and trigger pull. The place she had spent 11 years learning to trust. Then she heard the mortar crew adjusting their tube to a new azimuth. And everything in her went deliberate. 16 hours earlier, Hazel Kaur was standing at the back of a plywood briefing room at Forward Operating Base Kunar, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, listening to a man explain to her, without once using words, why she was not important. Gunnery Sergeant Tarn Sen stood at the front of the room, 39 years old, looking older in the eyes and younger in the body, which is the specific damage 10 years of Ranger deployments does to a man. His call sign was Stack. His men called him top in front of officers and Tarn when it was just team. He ran the briefing the way he ran everything. No wasted motion, no wasted syllables, pure information transfer. His Rangers filled the chairs in the middle rows. Hazel and Corporal Clem Darv occupied the folding table in the back corner, next to the fire extinguisher and a broken radio mount that no one had gotten around to removing. 2 months at Fob Kunar, 2 months of the same table. Tarn walked through the mission. Reconnaissance patrol into the Kunar River corridor, northeast of the fire base. Village stability assessment components attached, which was the formal language that justified the presence of 2 cultural support team operators sitting in the back of the room. The route would take the patrol through the town of Gulem Khan, a compound assessment, then northeast along the Ridgeline Access Road before returning before last light. He did not look at Hazel when he said the words cultural support team. He did not look at her when he said support. He did not look at her at all. Staff Sergeant Grat Tor sat in the second row, 31 years old, lean. The kind of stillness that belongs to a man who has carried a specific anger for so long that the anger has become his resting posture. His eyes found Hazel's once during the briefing. Not hostility exactly. Something more considered than that. Recognition. The particular recognition of a man who believes he already knows everything about you that matters. Hazel looked back at him. She looked away last. Specialist Slade Hawk sat beside Tor, 26 years old, the team's scout sniper. He had a spotter scope slung over one shoulder and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had been told many times that he was exceptional and had not yet been in a situation where exceptional was not enough. During the section of the briefing covering emergency extraction routes, he was cleaning his fingernails with the cap of a pen. The briefing ended. Men stood and moved. Hazel stood and moved toward the trash can to throw away her cold cup. Tarn said without turning from the map board, "Core." She stopped. Village assessment, Compound 7 and Compound 11, women and children only. A pause that carried its own weight. Keep it clean. That was the entirety of her mission parameters. Keep it clean. She had received more detailed instructions for loading a supply manifest. "Roger that," she said. He nodded once and went back to his map. Outside the briefing room, the fob was already moving toward the sound of rotors warming on the flight line. Corporal Clem Darve caught up to Hazel at the supply cage, her body armor half buckled, hair still damp from a quick shower. "What's Compound 7?" Clem asked. "We'll find out when we get there." Clem considered that for a moment. She was from a small town in Ohio, 24 years old, 4 prior missions with Hazel over the past 2 months. She was not a soldier in the way the Rangers in that briefing room were soldiers. She was something the Army had recently invented and was not yet sure how to use, and the uncertainty showed in how she carried herself. Always watching, always half a degree short of the confidence she was reaching for. But she had not quit, not once. In 2 months, through things that would have sent other people to the medical tent with their hands shaking, she had not quit. That was not a small thing. "Copy," Clem said, and finished buckling her armor. The convoy rolled out at 4:30. 3 vehicles, 2 gun trucks, 1 MRAP in the center, Rangers on the doors and in the turrets. Hazel and Clem rode in the MRAP behind the radio operator, forward of the rear gunner. The Afghan National Police escort ran 100 meters ahead of the lead vehicle. 4 men in a blue pickup truck, district-vetted standard integration. Hazel watched them through the scratched ballistic glass. She had spent 11 years in the Army learning to read patterns in the way people move when they believe they are not being observed. The difference between the body language of a man who is waiting for something to happen and the body language of a man who is making something happen. The escort was making something happen. 3 of the 4 men had their phones out. Not unusual. What was unusual was the timing. Phone out 2 seconds, phone away. Repeated precisely as the convoy passed each culvert, each compound wall, each road feature large enough to conceal a device. Not checking messages, logging positions, marking the convoy's progress against a prearranged grid. She reached for the radio. "Stack, this is Shade. Your ANP escort is running a timing protocol on our route. Phone usage consistent with IED trigger coordination." Silence on the net. Then Core, "Those men have been vetted through the district police chief's office. Stay in your lane." She looked at the man in the front passenger seat of the police truck. He turned his head and looked back at the MRAP through the space between their vehicles. For 1 flat second, his gaze settled on the exact spot on the ballistic glass where she was sitting, as if he could see through the green tint directly to her face. Then he tucked the phone into his breast pocket and faced forward. He knew she had seen him. Hazel sat back. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not key the radio again. She noted the time on her watch. She noted the locations of the 3 culverts they had just passed. She noted the road profile ahead. You could do everything right and still end up in the valley with the geometry against you. She knew that better than most people on this firebase. The town of Gulem Khan occupied a shallow valley between 2 ridgelines. 300 compounds arranged around a central market square that had stopped functioning as a market in 2007. The walls were the same color as the mountains behind them. The roads were dry, packed mud that crumbled at the edges. The rangers secured a perimeter. Hazel and Clem moved into the compound assessment. Compound 7 was 3 rooms and a cook fire. 4 women, a grandmother, 2 younger women in their 20s, a teenager, 2 children under 5. The men of fighting age were not present. Men of fighting age in Kunar province in 2009 were frequently absent when American patrols arrived. Hazel moved through the protocol. Respectful and efficient, she checked what she was there to check. She asked the questions she was mandated to ask, through the interpreter who stood at the compound entrance and relayed everything in a voice pitch to carry no more than 10 feet. The grandmother watched everything. She was a woman who had survived multiple governments and multiple armies and had the eyes of someone who expected to survive more. She watched the rangers on the road. She watched the interpreter. She watched Hazel with the careful, cataloging attention of someone taking inventory. Hazel finished with the younger women and moved toward the doorway. The grandmother said something in Pashto, under her breath, almost private. The interpreter started to translate. She says the weather has been. The grandmother said more, sharper this time, specific. The interpreter stopped and recalibrated. She says there is an old man who climbs the East Ridge every morning before prayer call. He carries a black box. A brief hesitation. She says this is new, started 2 weeks ago. Hazel kept her face perfectly neutral. Ask her what he looks like. The grandmother answered without waiting to be asked. She was already looking at the compound's single east-facing window. Old, the interpreter said. She knew him from before the First War. She says he is someone who knows the ground. Someone who knows the ground. Compound 7 was done. Hazel thanked the women with a small nod, stepped back into the road, and found a section of wall to stand against. She pulled the small notebook from her left chest pocket and sketched the ridge profile from memory. The east ridge ran northeast to southwest. The crest sat 400 to 500 meters above the valley floor. A rocky outcropping at the summit matched the coordinates of a Soviet-era observation post she had studied on satellite imagery back at the firebase. She wrote 4 things: ridge, observation post crest, black box, radio or optics, 2 weeks active. Then she wrote, east of tomorrow's patrol route. She found Tarn Sen at compound 11, outside the entrance wall, going over a sector sketch with one of his team leaders. She waited until he looked up. She showed him the notebook. He read it without expression, read it once and handed it back. Pass it to S2 when we're back at the firebase, he said. That's their lane. The ridge is directly east of our route tomorrow, she said. I know where the ridge is, Staff Sergeant. She folded the notebook and put it back in her pocket. The mission had been planned before she filed the report. It would proceed as planned. She understood the logic. Planning inertia serves real purposes in a combat environment where changing course on thin intelligence creates its own risks. She understood every part of the reasoning that led a man like Tarn Sen to receive what she was saying and file it without action. That did not make her wrong. She went back to the MRAP and ate a protein bar and watched the East Ridge until the sun moved behind it. They returned to the firebase at 1600 hours. She filed the S2 report. The duty clerk confirmed receipt. No further action notation followed. She understood that too. The intelligence landscape of Kunar province in 2009 was crowded with old men and black boxes and 2 weak patterns that could mean anything or nothing. S2 shops triaged. That was their job. She had done hers. She ate dinner alone at a table near the dining facility exit. Slade Hawk came in with two rangers, loud and settled, the ease of men who have not yet started sitting with tomorrow. She watched him eat. She noted the looseness in his shoulders, the way he laughed at something across the table without fully hearing it first. She had seen his shot cards. His groupings at 600 meters were excellent. 3-inch spreads, 5 round groups in standard conditions. She thought about how those groupings would hold when the scope glass was coming apart against his face. Then she told herself she was borrowing from a future that had not arrived. She threw away her tray and went to her room. It was a 12-foot square of plywood and sandbags that she shared with Clem Darv. Clem was already on her cot, turned toward the wall, her breathing slow, and even in the way of someone either asleep or very nearly so. Hazel checked the lock on the door, sat on the edge of her cot, waited for her eyes to adjust. Then she reached under the cot and lifted out the olive-drab medical bag. Standard combat lifesaver bag on the outside. Every ranger on the firebase had seen it slung on her shoulder for 2 months. No one had searched it. There is never time to search the medic's bag. There is always something more urgent. She unzipped it by feel, working quietly, letting her hands do what they had done 11 times before in this room. The barrel came out first, wrapped in gauze bandage, 20 inches, heavy. She laid it beside her boot on the plywood floor. The receiver group came next, wrapped in a second layer of gauze, tucked beneath the tourniquet pouch. The stock assembly rode in the main compartment in 2 pieces between the IV bags and the SAM splint material. She had spent 6 weeks modifying the bag's internal structure, building small wrapped braces from thermoplastic material to keep each component from shifting or clinking during movement. 11 evenings. This room. This dark. The M110 SAS. Semi-automatic sniper system. .308 Winchester. Officially assigned to a staff sergeant named Ray Olin, killed in a vehicle rollover in Kandahar province in 2007, whose weapon had been processed through supply channels and reissued, and subsequently lost in the paperwork between 2 forward operating bases and a depot at Bagram. Hazel had found it in damaged condition in a parts cage at Camp Dwyer 14 months ago. 3 weeks of repair work. A machinist friend who asked no questions. She had fired it in the dark in the Mojave at 600 meters and knew its cold bore shift and its cant sensitivity, and the precise way it ran when the chamber had been closed for 8 hours in mountain cold. From somewhere beyond the wire, far enough away to be background rather than threat, a long burst of automatic fire rolled across the mountains. Then silence. Not every sound in Kunar province is incoming. Some of it is just the mountains reminding you where you are. Clem's breathing shifted, not waking but aware. Hazel held still, the rifle in her hands, stock in her left palm, muzzle at the ceiling, assembled and present and real. She had learned to shoot before she could drive. Her father had taught her in a field behind a house in West Texas, not large enough to be a farm and not small enough to be a lot. He taught her the way his own father had taught him, that shooting is a language, and fluency comes from listening rather than talking. She won her first competition at 14. She was shooting nationally at 20. She was in the Army at 23 and running ranges that took her breath away. She had requested the Cultural Support Team assignment 8 months ago, 3 days after the Firebase Bravo incident, while the investigation was still formally open and her name was still formally attached to it. The request was approved without comment, which was its own kind of comment. She had not told anyone she was bringing the rifle. She had not told anyone what she intended to do if the moment arrived. She pressed her lips together. The moment had not arrived yet, but she had been in Afghanistan long enough to know that the moment always comes. It comes to the person who prepared and to the person who did not. The only difference between those two people is what happens in the seconds after. She reassembled the rifle in the dark, twice, disassembled and reassembled, counted the seconds, under 90, acceptable. She loaded one magazine, 14 rounds, each one loaded within 2/10 of a grain. She checked every primer with her thumbnail in the dark, seated flush, neck tension even. She placed the magazine in the bag, disassembled the rifle back to components, wrapped each piece in its gauze, zipped the bag quietly. Set her internal clock for 3:15. She did not sleep immediately. She lay with her eyes open in the dark and thought about the grandmother in Compound 7, the watching eyes, the decision that woman had made for her own reasons to tell a stranger in body armor what she knew. In Hazel's experience, that was one of the rarest and most significant things a person could offer in a war, actual information, rather than the information they believed you wanted to hear. The grandmother had not given it out of alliance. She had given it because she was 60 years old in a country that had been at war for as long as she could remember, and she had made a calculation about which way the wind was blowing, and she had chosen to act on it. Hazel hoped the calculation was right. She closed her eyes. At 3:20, she was dressed and moving. She walked to the eastern perimeter berm in the dark and stood looking at the east ridge. In the pre-dawn black, it was only a shape against a slightly lighter dark, a long, irregular wall running northeast to southwest, the topography of ground that had been fought over for 3,000 years and would be fought over for 3,000 more. She thought about the old man, the black box. 2 weeks of morning climbs meant 2 weeks of preparation, which meant the schedule was already established, which meant the trigger was not something being planned. It was something being waited for. She thought about the convoy route, the approach through the valley, the Soviet motor pool ruins at the northeast bend, the high ground at the ruins, the northeast corner wall still mostly intact, the broken section on the north face open to the ridgeline. A position that would give a shooter commanding observation with cover on 3 sides and an approach from the south that was sheltered from the road for most of its length. Command and observation, clean geometry, exactly what someone who knew the ground would choose, exactly what a man who had fought in this valley once before would recognize the moment he walked up to it. She went back to the vehicle yard. Tarn Sen was at the lead gun truck, checking his radio mount in the dark, not looking up when she arrived. He ran one finger along the laminated route card on the door panel. East Ridge assessment is above our patrol tier, he said, not specifically to her, a statement of existing fact. Roger, she said. S2 has it logged. Roger. He looked up then, not directly at her but toward her, which in Tarn Sen's economy of expression was close to direct. Keep your bag close today, he said. An odd instruction, she filed it. Always do, she said. He looked back at the route card. The convoy formed at 4:30, same vehicles, same order. The ANP escort truck moved to the front position, all 4 men sitting straight, no phones visible. Hazel noted that too. The phones being put away did not mean the coordination had stopped. It meant it had shifted to something she could no longer observe. The convoy moved through the gate in the dark. They drove northeast. The road ran between high ground on both sides, beautiful in the way that terrain with perfect tactical geometry is beautiful, which is to say functional rather than decorative. The valley narrowed. The ridges came in close. The sky overhead was a shade of blue that only exists at this altitude before the haze rises, when the air still has edges. 40 minutes out the valley opened, and the objective compound cluster appeared ahead. The dried riverbed, the burned-out motor pool ruins beyond. She looked at the ruins. Northeast corner wall. Standing. High. The broken section on the north face exactly as she remembered from the road the previous day. Even at this distance and in the early morning light, she could see the upper ledge where the wall had partially collapsed and left a shelf of broken stone some 35 feet up. And above that, another 10 feet of intact wall capped with the flat surface of the original roof section, crumbled at the edges but intact at the center. 45 feet at the top, enough to see everything in the valley below. She looked at the east ridge, morning light on the crest. She found the observation post position with her eyes because she had memorized its coordinates. A slab of rock at the summit, catching the angle of early light. Empty as far as she could see. Slade Hawk's voice came over the radio from the gun truck ahead. Calm and certain. Clear. No personnel on high ground, we're good. The old man was not visible on the ridge. Or the old man was on the ridge and Slade Hawk could not see him. These were not the same thing. The convoy halted at the compound cluster. Rangers dismounted. Security positions, perimeter, stack and clear. Automatic and clean. Hazel and Clem stepped out of the MRAP into the morning air. Dust and juniper and cook smoke from somewhere off the road. The light was long and clean and moving across the valley floor. She adjusted the medical bag strap across her chest. She looked at the motor pool ruins, the northeast corner, the intact east wall, the broken north section, an approach from the south that stayed in ground cover for most of its length. From inside those ruins, looking back down the valley, the road was visible for 800 meters in both directions. Grat Tor walked past her toward the forward security position, not looking at her. Then he stopped. "Cor," he said, still facing away, "don't wander." She said nothing. He walked on. Clem came to stand beside her. She was looking at the ruins with the deliberate attention of someone who has learned that the things worth noticing are usually the things nobody else is looking at. "That's good ground over there," Clem said quietly. "Yes," Hazel said. Clem looked at her. "You already reported the ridge." "I reported the ridge," Hazel said. "S2 has it." A pause. Clem looked back at the ruins. "Okay," she said. Not agreement, acknowledgement. Clem Darv was learning the difference and she was learning it fast. The compound assessments at Gulem Khan North took 40 minutes. 2 compounds, 7 women, 9 children. She found nothing specific to report. She asked her questions and listened to the answers and watched the women watch her. In the second compound, a woman in her 40s took Hazel's arm and pulled her 2 steps from the others. The interpreter relayed in a low voice. "She says the road feels different today. She says her husband came back from the eastern side of the valley last night. She has not seen him since before prayer this morning." Hazel noted it without reacting. She did not have time to pass it up the chain before Tarn's voice called the order to reform and move. She filed it with the other things. The phone pattern in the escort, the old man and the black box, the ruins with the clean geometry, the husband who had been on the eastern side of the valley the night before and was absent now. Points on a line. In Kunar province in 2009, a line with enough points becomes something you can read if you know how. The cost of misreading it is paid in a currency that does not spend twice. The convoy loaded. The patrol turned west from the compound cluster. The motor pool ruins moved to their right flank northeast, exactly as the route map showed. High corner wall, broken north section, sheltered southern approach. Hazel watched through the rear window until the road bent and the ruins moved out of sight. She turned around and faced forward. The east ridge was ahead through the windscreen now, the sun fully on the crest. the observation post position catching light at an angle that made it briefly bright before the shadow shifted. Nothing on it. The old man was not on the crest. She understood why. He did not need the crest anymore. 2 weeks of morning climbs meant 2 weeks of counting and confirming. The counting was done. Whatever he had been watching for had arrived and been marked and communicated. He was somewhere else now, somewhere she could not see from a moving vehicle on a road he had already mapped. Hazel pressed the medical bag against her side with her right forearm, felt the weight of the barrel, the receiver, the stock, wrapped in gauze and waiting. She had assembled it in her mind already, the sequence of movements running clean and automatic, even as the components remained separate. The MRAP hit a rough patch and shuddered. Clem grabbed the handhold without thinking, quick and automatic. The balance of someone who has been in enough bad vehicles on enough bad roads to trust the body before the mind catches up. That was real. That was growth you could measure. Clem, Hazel said. Yeah. When we stop, stay 2 steps behind me, no more than 2. Clem looked at her. Something passed across her face, a question she decided not to ask. Copy, she said. The convoy made the final bend. The valley narrowed. The ridgelines came in on both sides and the road became a corridor, and the corridor opened onto the Soviet motor pool ruins directly ahead, much larger now, the broken walls and the high standing east face filling the windscreen. The upper ledge of broken stone was visible from here. The flat cap at the very top caught the morning light. The patrol route turned west at the river crossing. 700 meters to the crossing. Tarn Sen's voice on the radio, stacked to all elements, approaching waypoint 6, stay sharp. 700 meters. 600. The ruins directly ahead. 500. Hazel held the bag against her side and looked through the ballistic glass at the northeast corner of the motor pool, at the intact east wall and the broken north section, and the sheltered ground behind it. The morning light was fully on it now, clean and hard and revealing. She was looking at it because she could not look, because some information does not wait to be formally processed. It arrives in the body before it reaches the mind, and by the time you can name what you know, the knowing has already moved past you into action. 400 meters. 300. The radio crackled and Tarn said something, and the words were already behind her, because the part of her that processes words had stepped aside for the part that counts distance and reads angles and knows, without ceremony and without doubt, exactly what happens next. She sat forward in her seat. Press the bag tighter. 200 meters. Hazel Core looked at the ruins and felt everything in her go quiet and clear and ready. She had always been ready. She had only been waiting for the moment to know it. The shot came from the northeast corner of the motor pool ruins, before the MRAP crossed the last 100 meters. A single crack, flat and hard off the stone. Then the world came apart all at once. The lead gun truck absorbed a PKM burst across its hood and windshield, and the driver locked the brakes, and the vehicle skidded sideways on the loose gravel road, and the rangers on the doors were already dropping into fire positions before the truck stopped moving. The second PKM opened from the southwest corner of the ruins, the third from an elevated position on the east face wall, shooting down at an angle that systematically eliminated most of the natural cover along the road below. 3 separate positions, 3 separate weapons, an L-shaped kill zone that had been set up and was waiting for them the same way you wait for something you already own. The MRAP took a burst across its front windscreen. The ballistic glass held but starred white, and the driver turned hard right off the road, fighting for any ground that might offer cover, and Hazel already had her hand on the door handle. "What are we doing?" Clem said from beside her. "Getting out," Hazel said. "2 steps behind me, no more." She pushed the door open and stepped down into the gravel and moved low and fast to the shadow of a low stone wall on the road's south edge. The air tasted like propellant. The noise of the 3 PKMs was physically present, a pressure against the ears and chest. Clem was 2 steps behind her and she could hear her breathing, and the breathing was fast but controlled. Good. Controlled fear is the most functional kind. From his position in the gun truck's turret ring, Slade Hawk was working the northeast corner. He had his spotter scope up, tracking, and he fired 3 rounds toward the muzzle flash in the ruins. The PKM answered him. The burst crossed the gun truck at an angle, chewing through metal, and 1 round struck the spotter scope mount 3 inches from Slade's right eye. The mount came apart. Metal fragments at high velocity, small size, the specific combination that does not kill a man but removes him from the fight with the same finality as a kill shot. Not a piece large enough to take the skull. Pieces exactly the right size to blind temporarily, to fill a face with fire, to dismantle in 4 seconds everything that years of training spent building. Slade made a sound that was not a word and not a scream. He pressed both hands to his face, and his rifle fell against the turret, and his body folded into the corner of the opening, and he was done. 60 seconds into the engagement, the team's sniper was gone. Not dead, still breathing, still present on the vehicle, just completely and entirely gone from the fight, which in the geometry of what was happening to this patrol amounted to the same result. Hazel had seen it happen. She saw exactly what it was and what it meant. She looked at the ruins from behind the stone wall. 3 PKM positions. Tarn Sen was behind the front wheel well of the MRAP, firing controlled pairs toward the northeast corner, his rangers trying to build any kind of return fire that could slow the tempo and buy time to think. But the geometry was wrong, and the men who had designed this position had understood the geometry very well. The PKM on the east face had the angle on everything south of the road. The southwest gun covered the road west. The northeast gun covered the road north and east. They were pinned in the bottom of a box, and the box had been designed by someone who had done this before. Grat Tor was 30 meters to Hazel's left, behind a low dirt berm, firing controlled bursts toward the southwest position. He was moving properly, methodical, doing his job with the automatic competence of a man who has trained for exactly this. But without the sniper taking down the elevated east-face gun, the box had no exit. The math did not work. Hazel looked at the northeast section of the ruins. Where the multi-story motor bay wall had remained mostly intact, the first accessible ledge of broken stone and concrete sat approximately 35 feet above the valley floor, and above that, the original roof section capped the wall at 45 feet. From that height, she would have cover on 3 sides and a clear line of sight to all 3 PKM positions. She ran the angles in her mind the way she ran wind and distance, automatically and without ceremony. She looked down at the medical bag. She opened it. "Clem," she said. "Yeah." 2 M18s, throw them south as far as you can. Clem did not ask why. She reached into her vest, pulled both smoke canisters, pulled both pins, and threw them overhand to the south. 2 throws that put the orange smoke between their position and the southwest PKM position. The smoke began to bloom, low and spreading in the morning air. Hazel laid the bag flat on the ground. Her hands went into it. The barrel came out first, wrapped in gauze, laid beside her knee on the gravel. The receiver group next, wrapped separately, seated against the barrel. The stock assembly, 2 components joined. The bolt carrier group, seated and driven home. The scope mounted and locked, already zeroed from the last time she had fired it in the Mojave in the dark. The magazine seated, bolt released forward. 73 seconds. She had done it in her room 11 times in darkness. Here on the gravel behind a stone wall with 3 automatic weapons working the air above her, and the orange smoke moving south and Clem crouched 2 feet away, she did it in 73 seconds. She raised the assembled M110 and looked through the scope. Clear optics. The smoke was drifting in the right direction. She looked at Clem. Clem was staring at the rifle with an expression that was moving rapidly from shock towards something more useful. "Spotting scope," Hazel said. Clem pulled the CSD spotting scope up from around her neck. "Ready." From 30 meters to the left, behind the dirt berm, Grat Tor had stopped firing. He had turned his head toward the stone wall and was looking at Hazel with the assembled rifle in her hands. He was absolutely still, not confused, recognizing. The specific recognition of a man seeing something he had been carrying a belief about for 8 months suddenly contradicted by what is directly in front of him. She did not look at him. She looked at the ruins and began to move. The most covered route to the ledge crossed 20 meters of open ground between the stone wall and the ruin's south face. The PKM on the east face had that crossing for approximately 4 seconds. The smoke from the M18s was not positioned to block the angle completely. She studied it for 1 second. Then she moved. Not straight across. A lateral broken line, low, using the distraction of the Rangers' return fire and the simple disbelief that someone would move toward the ruins rather than away from them. She crossed the 20 meters and pressed against the interior south wall and listened. The PKM on the northeast corner was 12 meters ahead of her and above, firing down through a gap in the collapsed wall. She could hear the belt feeding, the rhythm of it. The pauses between bursts when the gunner was acquiring a new target. She found the first foothold at 8 feet, a ledge of old stone at the base of the motor bay's interior wall. Then 18 feet, a section of intact wall face where old rebar gave her 3 solid grips. Then 30 feet, where the structure narrowed and the handholds became difficult and she had to trust her boots on the stone more than her hands. At 30 feet she pressed flat against the wall face and held still and felt the vibration of the PKM in the stone through her chest. Then the last section, the exposed climb to the upper ledge and then above it to the roof cap, open on the north side, 15 feet of careful movement to the top. She came over the edge of the wall cap and rolled onto the firing position, 45 feet above the valley road. The view opened below her. Northeast PKM, 22 meters to her right on the same level, the gunner completely focused on the MRAP below. Southwest PKM, 200 meters across the ruins, lower elevation, gunner holding the west road. East face elevated position, 160 meters to her left and 15 meters higher still. The PKM that had controlled the most critical angle of the entire kill zone. She pressed into the stock, breathed. The northeast gunner first, closest, most dangerous to the men pinned below. She found him in the scope. He was tracking the MRAP with his full body, his entire attention oriented toward the road. He had not looked to his right in the last 40 seconds. She exhaled halfway and held it. Fired. The gunner went down and the PKM went silent, and every ranger in the kill zone heard the single shot from the high position in the northeast ruins and understood that something had changed. She was already tracking the southwest position. The southwest gunner was reacting, beginning to turn toward the sound of the single shot. She fired while he was still moving through the turn. 1 round. He did not complete the turn. 2 positions, 43 seconds. Below her she could see the Rangers moving, using the changed pressure, Tarn Sen directing them with hand signals and short bursts on the radio. The geometry of the engagement had shifted. Not one yet, but the box had a hole in it now. She swung to the east face. 160 meters. 15 meters of elevation above her. A more complex angle than the first two, requiring the specific correction for steep uphill shooting that most riflemen learn in theory and very few learn in practice. She had learned it in the Mojave at night at various angles until the math was automatic. She found the gun in the scope, the gunner still firing, still tracking the Rangers below, still completely unaware of the single rifle working from the northeast. She adjusted, settled the reticle, fired. The east face PKM went silent. The kill zone below was not clean yet. There were still fighters in the compound cluster, still small arms coming from the south side, and the engagement had not ended, only shifted. But the three guns that had held the entire patrol in a box were silent, and the Rangers below were moving now with intention rather than survival. Hazel stayed on the ledge. She swept the scope across the compound cluster, looking for the next threat. She was running the south compound wall when she saw the boy. He came from a doorway on the left flank of the patrol's position, a doorway that had been closed during the entire engagement. He was young. She saw his face in the scope and understood young the way you understand something that you can feel in the chest before you can name it. 14, perhaps 15. Running low and fast, moving toward the left flank of the compound cluster where the pressure was thinnest, carrying something tucked under his right arm, something rolled, something cylindrical, wrapped loosely in cloth. 310 meters. The angle was clean, wind from the northwest, unchanged. The calculation was one she had already done for this range and this temperature. She put the reticle on him. He was running the way people run when they have been sent to do something they are afraid to do, or when they are running for their lives, or when someone with a weapon has told them to run and the alternative is worse than running. She had seen people run like that before in this country, and she had learned to read the difference between those categories. And she had learned also that reading the difference at 300 meters through a scope in an active engagement, with 4 seconds to decide, with incomplete information and a face that is 14 years old, is not a thing you can do with certainty. You can only do it with what you have. 3 seconds. She took the first one to look at his face through the scope, the fear in it, the direction of his eyes not toward the Rangers, not tracking enemy positions, eyes down and focused on his feet and the ground ahead of him. She took the second. The third second passed. She did not fire. Her finger did not move. She simply did not fire, and then he was gone, through the doorway on the left flank and out of her sight. She moved the scope back to the ruins. Her breathing was normal. Her hands were steady. She had looked at a boy in a scope for 3 seconds and made a decision, and the decision was made and permanent the way all decisions made at the edge of available information are permanent. 7 minutes later, the left flank opened up. An RPG from the direction of the doorway the boy had entered hit the stone wall 6 meters from Clem Darv's position. The shaped charge detonated, and the blast wave and fragments came outward and lateral and caught Clem on the left side of her head. Clem went down. Not unconscious. She went down sitting, her back finding the wall, her right hand going to the left side of her face. Her eyes were open and tracking normally, but something was wrong in the way she was holding her head, in the slight tilt to the right, in the expression that was not pain exactly but the particular disorientation of someone who cannot hear what they know they should be hearing. Hazel came off the ledge. Down the broken wall in 5 seconds, across the open ground, She was beside Clem before Clem had fully registered she was there. "Look at me," Hazel said. Clem looked at her. "Left ear." Clem nodded once, careful with the movement. Hazel checked her quickly. No penetrating skull injury. No shrapnel lodged in the neck or jaw. A scalp laceration above the left ear, manageable. The blast wave had done something to the left ear canal and the structures behind it that was not going to be treated in the field. The kind of damage that has a name and a prognosis, and neither the name nor the prognosis changes what is happening right now in a ruined motor pool in Kunar province. She leaned to Clem's right side. "Can you hear me on this side?" "Yes," Clem said. Her voice was level. "Stay behind this wall." Clem pulled the spotting scope up from around her neck with both hands and put it to her right eye. Her hands were not shaking. She had gone pale, but her hands were not shaking. "I'm good," she said. "Go." Hazel looked at her for one full second. Then she looked across the road at Tarn Sen. He had seen Clem go down. He was looking at Hazel from beside the MRAP's wheel well. He looked at the medical bag and the rifle and at Hazel's face, and the look on his face was not the look of a man making a decision. It was the look of a man registering that a decision has already been made, somewhere else by someone else, and now he is living inside it. He nodded once. She went back into the ruins. The engagement lasted another 19 minutes. Small arms from the south compound fell quiet when a Ranger stack moved through the western wall opening and swept the position. The mortar team that had been adjusting their tube when the engagement was at its worst broke, when Hazel's fifth round of the day went through the sandbag berm they were using for cover, and put the crew down before the first adjustment completed. When it was over, the valley was quiet in the way valleys are quiet when a great deal of noise has just stopped. Tarn Sen did a head count on the road. One Ranger with a through-and-through in the left shoulder, treated and ambulatory. Slade Hawk in the gun truck with both hands pressed to his face and blood coming through his fingers in the slow, dark way that means serious rather than catastrophic. Clem Darv behind the stone wall, right hand on the spotting scope, left hand against the wall for balance, still tracking with the one functional ear. No killed in action. Hazel stood at the edge of the road and looked at the ruins in the sudden quiet, the motor pool walls, the high ledge, the morning sun making ordinary light on stones that had just been something other than ordinary. Tarn came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a while. "Southeast compound," he said finally. "When you were on the wall, you had a shot." "Yes," she said. He looked at the road. He was doing the math she had already done, running the geometry backward from the RPG that had hit 6 meters from Clem's position. "How long did you have him?" 3 seconds. "What did you see?" "A boy running, eyes on the ground." He did not respond to that. "You could read that either way," he said. "Yes," she said, "you can." He looked at her, the full look direct that she had never received from him in 2 months at this fire base. "What did you read it as?" She thought about it honestly. "I read it as a boy who had been sent somewhere he did not choose to go, who was afraid, whose eyes were not where a fighter's eyes would be." She paused. "I could have been wrong." "You could have been wrong," he said. "And now a Ranger is in that truck with his hands on his face." "Yes," she said, "and now he is." Tarn looked at the compound cluster. He breathed out slowly through his nose. "I don't know what that math comes out to," he said. "Neither do I," she said. "I made the best call I could with 3 seconds and what I could see." He said nothing. She looked at the road. "That's the only kind of call there is." He turned and walked back toward the gun truck. The medevac came in 38 minutes after the radio call. It kicked up a column of dust and morning grit from the road south of the engagement site, and touched down with the specific, purposeful noise of something that has come a long way to be in a place for exactly long enough. Slade Hawk was loaded on a litter. He was conscious. One hand had come away from his face, and she could see the damage, fragments across the right cheekbone and upward, the gauze the combat medic had applied running from his right cheekbone to above his right eye. He was looking at the sky with his left eye. The right eye was obscured by the gauze and by whatever was happening beneath it. She watched them load him. He had been exceptional at 600 meters, until the situation required something different from exceptional. That was not a judgment. That was just the way the edge of a man's training works when you find it. She hoped his right eye was still there. She thought it probably was. Fragments that size, at that angle, tended towards surface damage more than penetrating injury. She had no way to be certain. The helicopter lifted and turned north. Tarn called the patrol together beside the MRAP. He spoke for 4 minutes, covering the route back, the report sequence, the S2 debrief that would happen the same afternoon. He used the word preliminary twice, which was the word that precedes the words that actually matter. When he was done, the patrol loaded. Hazel helped Clem into the MRAP and sat beside her. Clem had the spotting scope down now, both hands in her lap. She was staring straight ahead with the controlled attention of someone who has learned that distress is less useful than observation and has chosen observation. "Left ear is gone," she said. It was not a question. "Probably," Hazel said. "The canal and behind it." Clem absorbed that permanently. "I don't know." Clem nodded, absorbed that too. The MRAP started moving. The ruins fell away behind them. Through the rear window, Hazel watched the high wall of the motor pool pass out of sight as the valley turned, the ledge she had climbed now just a shadow on stone, already becoming the kind of thing that is difficult to explain to anyone who was not there. "Hazel," Clem said. "Yeah." "The boy." Hazel looked at her. "I had the scope on him," Clem said, "for the last 2 seconds before he went through the door." "What did you see?" "What you saw," she said, "or what I think you saw." A pause. "I don't know." "Neither do I," Hazel said. Clem said nothing for a while. The road moved under them. 7 minutes, Clem said finally. 7 minutes. That's how long it took. Yes. Clem put her hands flat on her thighs. "I would have made the same call," she said. "I think. I don't know if that's true. I think it is." Hazel looked out the window at the valley moving past, the ridgelines, the rock walls, the deep, ancient sky above them. "It might never be true until you're actually looking at it," she said. "And then you have 3 seconds to find out what's true." Clem was quiet for a long time. "Roger that," she said. Something in her had shifted, not broken, not hardened. Something more precise than either of those, the settling that happens when a person has come up against the exact edge of what they understood about themselves and found out there was more past the edge than they expected. Not comfort, something better than comfort. Real knowledge. They drove through the valley, and the valley widened, and the road smoothed out, and the world became, by degrees, the world it had been that morning before the ruins, which was the same world it had always been, because the world does not change simply because your understanding of it has. 40 minutes after leaving the ruins, the MRAP turned through the gate at Forward Operating Base Kunar, and the road became gravel, and the gravel became the familiar parking field, and the vehicles stopped. They climbed out. Somewhere in the compound, a generator was running. The ordinary sounds of the firebase going about its afternoon business surrounded them, which was its own kind of strangeness, that the world had continued in parallel with the last 4 hours and did not particularly notice the difference. Tarn Sen stood by the lead gun truck, looking at nothing specific, which was the look of a man who is already composing his after-action report in his head, getting the sequence right, deciding what goes in and what the words for the things that go in will be. Hazel walked past him. "Core," he said. She stopped. He did not say anything for a moment. "Good work," he said. She turned and looked at him, not surprised exactly, but reading the phrase carefully, the way you read a document that has significant space between what it says and what it means. "You too," she said. She walked on. Later in the medical bay, she stood outside Slade Hawk's bay curtain while the flight surgeon finished his assessment. The surgeon came out and she asked him, and he said the right eye was intact, surface fragment injury, a partial corneal abrasion from a secondary fragment, vision impaired in the short term and possibly in the long term but probably not absent. She stood there for a moment. "Probably," she said. "The eye is there," the surgeon said. "What it does from here is not a question I can answer tonight." She nodded and walked away. She sat in the dust outside the medical building and unsleeved the M110-1 component at a time and wrapped each piece in its gauze and packed it into the bottom of the bag the way she had packed it the night before. The same sequence, the same care, as if the unpacking and repacking were part of the same ritual that had started 11 nights ago in a 12-foot room and ended somewhere she had not been able to name when she started. She zipped the bag. The afternoon lay around her, the firebase in its late morning rhythm, dust and generators, and the distant sound of a radio operator running a check on the far side of the compound. Grat Tor appeared at the corner of the building. He stood there, not coming closer, not leaving. He had his hands at his sides and he was looking at the bag in her hands and then at her face. She met his eyes. He nodded, one motion, slow and full and completely different from the nod he had given her in the briefing room 2 months ago, in the second row, when he had looked at her with the certainty of a man who had already decided. A different kind of acknowledgement, not agreement, recognition, the specific recognition of a man updating a ledger that he had kept closed for a long time. He went around the corner of the building. She looked at the bag in her hands for another moment. Then she stood up and went inside. Several kilometers to the northeast, in a compound below the East Ridge, a man named Nasrallah Wardak was watching the smoke still rising in thin columns from the motor pool ruins in the hard light of midday. He was 62 years old. He had fought the Soviets in this valley 40 years ago, as a young man who had believed absolutely in the things young men who fight believe absolutely. He had counted vehicles from this ridge and relayed the information in the way he had learned during the First War, with patience and method and no particular attachment to the outcome. He was watching the smoke in the way that men who have lived a long time inside a war watch the results of what they have set in motion, not triumph, something more settled than that, a confirmation that the world is consistent, that things work the way he understands them to work, that his understanding, which he has tested many times across many decades, remains functional. He had not expected the response from the northeast wall. He sat with that for a while, a single rifle from the high position in the ruins, timing and placement that had been exact, 3 guns down in less than a minute, which was not the response this valley had shown in any engagement he had observed in the last 8 years. He turned that information over carefully, the way you turn a new kind of stone in your hand, checking its weight, reading its edges. Someone on that patrol had known what he was looking at. Someone had come prepared. He put a round on the flat rock beside him, not a gesture of respect, not yet. A marker, the beginning of a question he intended to have answered. He turned from the smoke and began the long walk down the eastern slope. Behind him, across the valley, Kunar sat in the hard noon light, the fire base running its ordinary operations below, and the helicopter that had departed the engagement site was a sound that had already gone. The helicopter set down at Kunar at 11:45 hours. The medics were on the pad, two of them with a litter they had not needed to use, which was a different kind of good news than no litter at all, the kind that comes with questions attached. Clem walked off the bird under her own power, one hand trailing along the fuselage for a moment before she let go, and the medics moved to her and she let them, which was its own measure of how bad the ear was. Hazel stepped off the bird behind her. The fob had the particular quality that a firebase acquires when it knows something happened that it does not yet know the full dimensions of. Conversations slightly shorter than they needed to be. People moving with slightly more purpose than their task required. The duty officer moving between buildings with a radio and a clipboard, the kind of controlled urgency that a place shows when it has absorbed something and is figuring out the shape of it. She walked the medical bag to the room she shared with Clem and put it under her cot. Then she walked back out. Tarn Sen was at the TOC entrance, going over a transmission log with his radio operator, not looking up. She watched him for a moment. The set of his shoulders, the angle of his head over the log, a man doing the next thing, which is what capable men do when the previous thing has been completed and the accounting has not yet begun. He had said good work. She had heard things in those two words that she was not certain were there. She had spent 2 months learning to read a man whose language was operational, who communicated through what he did not say as much as what he did. Maybe she was reading fluency into static. Maybe not. She ate. She showered. She changed into clean clothes and sat on the edge of her cot and looked at the floor for about 15 minutes without any particular thought occurring to her. That was normal. She had learned that after significant engagements the mind sometimes needs a period of simply running without a destination before it is ready to go somewhere specific. When she was ready to go somewhere specific, she went to the medical bay. Clem was on a cot with a bandage over her left ear and 2 pillows propped behind her shoulders. The flight surgeon had been in and gone. The bandage was clean. Her eyes were open and tracking the ceiling with the meditative focus of someone who has been told to be still and is doing the hard work of being still. She looked at Hazel when she came in. "Right ear is good," she said. "Left is provisional." "What does provisional mean?" "Means they don't know yet, could be temporary, could be 30%, could be gone." She paused. 30% is the middle scenario. What's the right scenario? Temporary. That's the one to aim for then. Clem smiled, small, real. Roger. Hazel sat in the chair beside the cot. She did not say anything particularly useful. She did not need to. She had been in a medical bay beside someone with damage that had not yet declared itself, and she had learned that what a person needs in that chair is mostly just the chair being occupied. She stayed for an hour. When she left, Grat Tor was in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes on the opposite wall. He was not waiting for anything in particular. He was doing the thing that Ranger NCOs sometimes do after a bad day, which is finding a position they can hold without being required to explain themselves. He looked at her when she came through the door. "How is she?" he said. It was not quite a question. Provisional, Hazel said. He nodded. He looked back at the opposite wall. Then he said without moving, "The ruins when you were assembling." "Yeah. I saw you for 30 seconds before I understood what I was seeing." A pause. "That's a long time." She said nothing. He turned his head and looked at her directly. 8 months ago, Firebase Bravo, I was 3 compounds down the road when they pulled the order back. He looked at the floor. I didn't know why at the time. The compound had a medical room in it, she said. The targeting data didn't include it. I called it before the strike. I know, he said. I read the investigation. She waited. You were right, he said, about the compound. He said it the way a man says something he has been carrying for a while and has decided to put down. The order was wrong. You were right to pull it. She looked at him. The careful, neutral look she had used in the second row of the briefing room 2 months ago. You believed otherwise, she said. I believed you'd frozen, he said, that you'd gotten to the moment and found out you couldn't do it. He met her eyes. I was wrong about that. She absorbed that. What I did today, she said, that's not the same as Firebase Bravo. I know. One was right, one I'm not certain about. I know that too, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. The man who had sat in the second row and carried the weight of a year-old certainty all the way to a ruined motor pool in Kunar province, and arrived at the other end of the day holding something different. Roger, she said. She walked down the hallway. The hearing was scheduled for 900 the following morning. She did not know the exact form it would take. JAG proceedings involving unauthorized weapons in a combat zone have a specific taxonomy, but the specific category she occupied was unusual enough that the taxonomy probably had a lane she was not aware of. She had carried a weapon that did not belong to her, in a manner that no regulation permitted, and used it in a combat engagement that her unit's command structure had no prior knowledge of. The law was clear. The paperwork was going to be significant. She lay on her cot and looked at the ceiling and thought about the rifle. It had started as a practical problem. She had identified a gap and she had filled it, the way she had been filling gaps her entire career, the way her training had taught her to think. What is needed? What is available? What is the distance between those two things, and how do you close it? The M110 had been available. The gap had been real. The closing was now documented in the after-action records of an engagement in the Kunar River corridor in the fall of 2009. She thought about the version of herself that had started this. The version that had put a rifle in a medical bag and carried it 2 months into a province that had already spent 40 years collecting the things men refused to finish, because some arguments do not conclude on anyone's schedule but their own. That version had made a reasonable calculation. She was not sure the calculation had been right. She was not sure it had been wrong. She was sure that the calculation had been hers to make, and she had made it, and now she was going to stand in a room and answer for it. That was reasonable too. She slept. A printed memo slid under her door at 600. She read it at 6:10. Administrative hearing, Building 14, 900, Major Aldrin presiding. 2 JAG officers. Her chain of command, which meant Tarnsen, which meant she would be in the same room as the man who had said good work 17 hours earlier. The memo used the phrase unauthorized weapon system 4 times in 8 lines, which was a measure of how seriously they were taking the paperwork. She folded the memo. She ate a full breakfast. She arrived at Building 14 at 8:47, 13 minutes early, which was the correct interval. The room had a table and 6 chairs and a window that looked out at the vehicle yard. The 2 JAG officers were already seated. A sergeant first class she did not recognize was positioned by the door with a legal pad. Major Aldrin came in at 8:55 and sat at the head of the table and put 2 folders in front of him without opening either. Tarn Sen came in at 8:58 and sat across from the JAG officers. He did not look at Hazel. She sat. Major Aldrin opened the first folder. He read from it without inflection, the way men read from documents that carry weight they are not supposed to add to with their voice. The facts as documented, the weapon, the registration history, the modifications, the points of origin, the chain of custody or absence of it, the engagement. He closed the first folder. He opened the second. He read from the after-action report. This one he read more slowly. The 3 PKM positions and the engagement geometry, the sniper asset removal from the fight, the unauthorized response from a cultural support team operator, the effect of that response on the engagement outcome. He read the language that Tarn Sen had written, which was specific and measured and left nothing out and added nothing that was not there. Hazel listened to Tarn's words in the major's voice and heard in them the same economy she had been learning to read for 2 months. Good work in formal language. When he finished the second folder, Major Aldrin looked at the JAG officers and then at Hazel. "Staff Sergeant Corps," he said, "is there anything in that account that is factually incorrect?" "No, sir," she said. "Is there anything you wish to add?" She had thought about this carefully. She had a specific thing she wished to say, and she had organized it the night before into the shortest possible version of itself, because brevity in formal proceedings is both a courtesy and a strategy. "Sir," she said, "the gap existed. The gap was real, not theoretical. In the absence of that gap, I would not have made the choice I made. I made the choice in the way I made it because I was the only person who had prepared to fill it." She paused. "I would make the same choice again under the same conditions." Major Aldrin looked at her for a moment. "That's a complicated answer, Staff Sergeant." "Yes, sir," she said. "The situation was complicated." He looked at the 2 folders. He looked at the JAG officers. He looked out the window at the vehicle yard for a moment that was slightly longer than the other moments. Then he looked back at Hazel. "What you did," he said, "is not going to become policy." "Understood, sir." "What you did is also in a folder that is going to require me to make some decisions about how it is formally categorized. Those decisions are not going to be made in this room today." He picked up both folders and aligned their edges. "You're confined to the fire base pending resolution. No missions. No field work." "Roger, sir." "That's all." She stood. She walked out of Building 14 into the bright noon air of the firebase. She stood there for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, and felt the particular lightness that comes not from resolution, but from having said the true thing in the room where the true thing needed to be said. The outcome was not resolved. The folders were going somewhere she could not follow. But the accounting had happened and she had been present for it, and the account had been accurate. That was something. She went back to the medical bay. Clem was sitting up when she came in, which was an improvement from the day before. The bandage had been changed. She had a cup of tea from somewhere and was holding it with both hands. "How'd it go?" she said. "Pending," Hazel said. Clem nodded. "Pending is not bad." "Pending is not bad," Hazel agreed. She sat in the chair again. Outside the medical bay window, the firebase was doing the things it did in the middle of a day, the ordinary maintenance of a place that is simultaneously a home and a weapon, the constant management of logistics and personnel, and the 1,000 decisions per hour that keep a forward operating base functional. "I've been thinking about the boy," Clem said. Hazel looked at her. I've been lying here for 18 hours thinking about the boy, she said. Not about my ear, about the boy. She looked at her tea. I keep running it back. What we saw, what we read, what happened 7 minutes later. And I don't land anywhere, Clem said. I keep starting from what we saw and running it forward, and I don't land anywhere definitive. I can land on he was armed and you should have fired. I can land on he was a boy running scared and you were right. Both of those landings have evidence. Neither one of them is complete. She looked up. Does that ever get better? Hazel thought about it honestly. It gets more familiar, she said. It doesn't get cleaner. Clem absorbed that. Okay, she said. That's most of what this job is, Hazel said. Living inside decisions that don't clean up completely. Learning to function in the space that's left. Clem looked at her. The clear, direct look of a 24-year-old woman who has been in a ruined motor pool in Kunar province and come out the other side with one ear and something that was not there before. You've been doing this for 11 years, Clem said. Yes. How much space is there, she asked, by year 11? Hazel looked at the window, at the firebase outside it, at the mountains she could see at the edge of the frame, pale and high and indifferent. Enough to keep moving, she said. That's what you're looking for, not enough to be comfortable, enough to keep moving. Clem looked at the mountains too, through the small window, the frame catching just the top third of the ridgeline. Okay, she said again. In the afternoon, Hazel went to the supply cage and found Slade Hawk sitting outside it on an upturned ammunition crate, at 1400 hours, with a bandage over his right eye and the left one focused on the middle distance. He looked up when she arrived. The gauze covered from his right cheekbone upward to above his right eye. She stopped. Flight surgeon says the eye is probably fine, he said. Probably, he likes that word. How's the cheek? Cosmetic, he looked at her steadily. You were on the wall. Yes. I heard the shot from the northeast, he said. I heard it and I knew I was done, and then I heard the shot and I thought, there shouldn't be anyone up there. And then the east face gun went quiet. He paused. I was listening for a fourth shot when the medic got to me. She said nothing. You carried it in the bag, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, something that was not simple enough to be called a single thing, a mixture of the pride that he was known for and something more measured underneath it, something that only shows up when pride has been tested against something larger than itself and has found the test clarifying. I was cleaning my nails during the extraction briefing, he said. I know. I know you know, he said. He looked at his hands. I won't do that again. She nodded. How's Darv? He asked. Provisional. He absorbed that. She stayed on the scope, he said. It was not a question. She stayed on the scope, Hazel said. Good, he said. Not casual. Not the easy good of a man who had been told good news. The specific good of a man who is measuring something against a standard, finding the measurement satisfactory and meaning it. She left him at the supply cage and walked the perimeter road. The firebase ran along the base of the eastern ridge, which was the same ridge she had watched from the berm in the pre-dawn dark 2 days ago, feeling the shape of what was coming. The ridge looked different from inside the wire than it did from outside it. Inside the wire it was backdrop, context, the thing that defined the shape of the horizon. Outside the wire it was something else. It was where Nasrallah Wardek had climbed for 2 weeks, alone before dawn, carrying a black box, counting vehicles on a road he had counted vehicles on in a different war, doing what men do when they know a place well enough to read it. She had not thought extensively about him since the engagement. She had been thinking about the other things, Clem and Slade and the hearing and the folders, and the geometry of decisions that do not close completely. But she had placed him, in the back of her understanding, in the category of things that were not finished. The round on the rock was not a gesture of conclusion. It was the beginning of a conversation. She thought about the grandmother in Compound 7, the watching eyes, the calculation that woman had made about the wind and which way it was blowing. She thought about her own calculation, the rifle in the bag, the 11 nights in the dark, the moment on the road at 200 meters when everything in her had gone quiet and ready. She had been right about the ruins. She had been right about the geometry. She had not been right about the boy, or she had been right about the boy in a way that came with consequences that she could not have known in advance, and the difference between those two versions of right was a thing she was going to be living inside for a long time. That was the space Clem had asked about. That was the 11 years. You do not run out of it. You just learn that it is the ground you are standing on. She reached the eastern perimeter berm and stopped. The last light was coming in at a low angle from the southwest, the kind of light that makes the mountains look closer than they are, that puts individual details in relief against the broad, flat face of the rock. She could see the east ridge clearly in this light, the observation post position at the crest, a slab of flat rock, empty now. Empty in the way that a position is empty when the man who occupied it has gone somewhere else. She looked at the crest for a long time. The fire-based sounds were behind her, generator hum, radio chatter at a distance, the particular rhythm of a place that will be here tomorrow, doing the same things with slightly different people, managed by the weight of its own momentum. She thought about the hearing and the two folders. She thought about the rifle in its bag under her cot and what happened to it next. She thought about Clem in the medical bay, drinking tea with both hands, learning the shape of what she had become in a ruined motor pool in Kunar province, living into the knowledge that was going to take years to fully absorb. She thought about Tarn Sen writing the after-action report with the specificity and measure of a man settling an account. He intended to be accurate. She thought about Grat Tor in the hallway, putting down something he had been carrying for 8 months, making the adjustment that a man makes when the thing he believed turns out to be different from the thing that happened, and making it without looking away. The light moved on the ridge. Somewhere on the eastern slope, past the wire, past the road, a man who had fought in this valley before and would probably fight in this valley again was carrying his own accounting home along a path she could not see. She was not afraid of him exactly. She was attentive to him. That was the right relationship to have with a man who put rounds on rocks. Behind her, the lights of the fob were coming on one by one in the cooling air, the way lights come on in the early evening when a place is settling into what it does in the dark. She did not turn to look at them. She was still looking at the ridge. She was still running the math. Wind from the northwest, temperature dropping with the elevation and the time of day, the geometry of the east slope and the valley floor, and the road that connected all of these to everything that would happen next. Not tonight. Tonight she was going back inside, back to the medical bay and the chair beside Clem's cot, back to the ordinary business of being a person in a place that had become, over 2 months, her version of a home. But the math did not stop. She had been right about the ruins, and the math from the ruins ran forward into what the next ruins would look like, and the ruins after that, and the valley that all of those ruins overlooked. That was the job. She had always known how to do the job. She turned from the ridge. She walked back toward the lights.